she felt like she had offended her family and had broken ties with them. And they wanted her to know that no, you really can't do that. We're still your family, and your parents will join us when it's their time. But for the meantime, we'd like to get to know you, and we'd like you to know that you belong here in a loving, supportive group of people who are ready to welcome you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Channel Within. Today, I'm speaking with Father Nathan Castle, and I am so excited to be having this conversation. Welcome, Father Nathan.
Nice to be with you.
Can you talk a little bit about your spiritual journey and how your calling found you, or you found it?
Sure. Well, I'm almost 70 years old. I'll be 70 in a few months. And I grew up in the southeast corner of Texas, Port Arthur, Beaumont. It's right on the Gulf Coast on the Louisiana border where my father was involved in coastal shipping. He was a harbor pilot. Um, I grew up in a home with both parents as very active practicing Catholic Christians. We weren't just taught rules and regulations of a world religion, but I was taught spiritual um, practice and spiritual communication as a child. I was taught that I had a family on earth and a family in heaven. Most of the time during the day, we interacted with our family on earth, but we dedicated time before sleep to talking to our heaven family who was with us during the day, but we're maybe more attentive to their presence right before sleep. Um, I learned that I was surrounded by the holy ones, that there are many good people that are alive in bodies on the earth, and that there are many uh, holy men and women who have died but can be with us to help us if we want them to be and ask for their help. So that I was living in, in both worlds, and that they weren't really in competition with one another or completely separate, that they blend together. Um, I went to Catholic schools primarily. Both of my aunts were, my dad's sisters were nuns, were Dominican sisters of the order that I belong to. And one of them, they both taught first grade, so they were very good at talking to children about the faith. And they taught me about the importance of children's prayers being super powerful. That in the gospel tradition, there's a lot of kind of upside down, the last being first and the poor being rich and the weak being powerful, that kind of thing. And so it made sense to me that children's prayers would be particularly powerful, if you will. My aunt said, God loves everyone and hears everyone's prayers, but the prayers of children go straight to God's heart. You won't be a child for very long, so don't waste your short childhood. Pray while you're a child for everything you and everyone you can think of. And then I learned about death. I didn't have death in my family or close circle as a child, so I would see a dead bird on the sidewalk or bury a pet, and I knew about cemeteries and things. I wasn't directly affected by death at a young age, but I knew it was a thing, and I knew that all of us would one day die, and that we hadn't any idea whether that would be after a short life or a long one. There were this idea that after you die, you keep living, and you live in one of three sort of otherworldly nation states, um, heaven, hell, or purgatory, which sounded like Mexico, the US, and Canada. It sounded like these three separate places that had boundaries and that you had membership in one of them. uh, that the purgatorial one in the middle, it seemed to me, would be the most populated because not very many people are perfect and not many are horrible. It seems like most of us land somewhere in the middle. And that middle place, as it was explained to me as a child, was a temporary space for cleansing. Purgation means to somehow clean, sort. You might have purged your garage or your sock drawer. We're recording this near the beginning of the new year, and sometimes that's what people do. They resolve that I'm going to purge, I'm going to get rid of unnecessary clothing or whatever. That purging had to do with leaving behind worldly attachments that were unhelpful in your on life progress. And some of that, unfortunately, went more in the direction of serving time as though in a prison.
Sure.
Uh, um, and that didn't, I received the teaching, but at the same time, it seemed to me Jesus forgave everybody on the cross. And he didn't wait for anybody to apologize because no one did. Father, forgive them all. They don't know what they're doing. Um, but we could say prayers in Catholic school. If you did well on a spelling test or a math page or something, you'd get a little holy card with a picture of a saint on one side and prayers on the back side. And if you prayed these prayers for someone who was in purgatory, you could reduce their purgatorial sentence. And so I was, as a little child, I was very busy doing that because it just seemed like something that was praiseworthy and good to do. And the same aunt told me that if my prayer sprung somebody into heaven, that is, if yours was the last prayer they needed to get out of purgatory, you would have a friend for all eternity. So that just sounded to me like, why wouldn't I want to do that? So anyway, I was always, raised in this home, in this Catholic home, and right before going off to college, I went on a retreat where I experienced the infilling of the Holy Spirit. Um, I don't know what Kundalini awakening is like, but sometimes when people talk about that, it feels like uh, receiving the Holy Spirit in a Pentecostal kind of way. Anyway, that happened to me, and it brought home to me a lot of. It verified or validated a lot of what I had been taught, that God was near me, paying attention, loving me completely. It made me want to pursue some sort of life that would put that at the forefront. Um, so ministry was one of those possibilities. And it was after 4 years of college that I decided I really needed to make up my mind. And I was impatient. I watched other people sort of meander through majors and ideas about what they might do, and I knew that was a possibility for me, but I just thought, no, I'd really rather just pick something and get started and do it. And right about that time, I began getting a different kind of messaging, I believe, from the Holy Spirit to try priesthood. So they don't let you become a priest overnight either. You just can't make up your mind, I'm going to be a priest and uh, study for it and make it happen. You have to be approved and, lots of discernment and other people's opinions come into bear and permissions and such. So anyway, I became a priest and then have worked mostly in campus ministry. I live on the campus of the University of Arizona in Tucson and help out around the edges while I write books and do podcasts and uh, retreats and things. But most of my career has been at Arizona State University for 12 years, UC Riverside for 5, and Stanford for 7. So much of my career has been, and campus ministry is much more interfaith than a lot of neighborhood church life might be. On college campuses, especially secular ones, you are there under the auspices of the Office of Student Life or something, and you have to play nice with all the other religious bodies. And so you get to know your colleagues, and you're in much more ongoing contact with people representing other faith traditions. And so, especially at Stanford, which is very international, I worked alongside a lot of people from the Eastern traditions like Hinduism.
Sure. Can you talk about the kind of work you do right now?
Do you mean the afterlife work or?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Well, for a long time, I called it my night job. About 30 years ago, well, backing up to childhood, I was praying for souls in purgatory, but we got newspapers in the morning and in the evening in those days. And even while I was just learning to read, I would get the pages of the people who had died, obituary pages.
Mhm.
Usually there was a photograph and a short summation of their life. And when you got to the bottom in the early and mid 60s when I was growing up, no one had a funeral anywhere except a house of worship. That didn't never happened at the beach or at the lake house or anywhere else. If even if a person wasn't very regular in the life of a congregation, their funeral would still be at a church. And I learned that there weren't any Hindus in my life at the time, or much of anything, but other Christians, but different kinds. And the Baptists often told us that we weren't real Christians, that we were uh, something else, and it wasn't nice. But I learned that the only the Catholic Christians believed that there was a purgatory, and so the only Catholic people who died got prayed for. And so they got to advance faster than the Protestant ones because their families didn't believe there was a purgatory and didn't know to pray for them. So that just seems so unfair to me that just the fact that you happen to be, from the different religion didn't meant that nobody prayed for you. So I would pray for the Protestants. I figured if you died in you were a Catholic, your family is responsible for you. But if you were not a Catholic, I would pray for you. So I'd look at the pictures in the paper and I'd take them to bed and I would pray for them before I went to sleep. And advanced, I'd talk to them and just say, I thought of myself as like a customer service agent in purgatory. I might have had the blazer and the name tag and say, Mira, would you like a cut? Would you like to go closer to the front of the line? Just follow me. And so I would pray people to advance in the line. If it sounds exhausting, that's all right because I was going to sleep anyway. And so
How old were you when you were doing this, Father Nathan?
probably about 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right along in there. It was just a thing that I did. That was my habit. And and it didn't involve any spiritual pyrotechnics. I wasn't hearing voices or visions or anything like that. It was just me looking at a picture in the newspaper and talking to the person and confident that they could hear me and trying to advance their circumstance.
What a beautiful thing to do for another soul at such a young age, too.
It just made sense to me. I mean, why wouldn't I want to do that? It didn't cost me anything. It was just a matter of doing it. And but then years later, in my early 40s, I had the experience of someone moving into my dream during the night. Um, I make a distinction between having a dream or receiving a dream. For me, having a dream is my own psychobabble, my psyche burbling through unfinished business or whatever you think our normal dreaming is accomplishing, if anything. The other part would be somebody's story moving into that screen, if you will, that
Mhm.
arena, with my permission. Because before I would go to sleep, I would. There's a word I don't know if you ever heard of it, Compline. In a monastery, it's the last prayer of the day in a Christian monastery,
Okay,
and it's related to the word complete. So the idea is to not just let the day run down, um, but but with a spiritual focus to complete the day by imagining your consciousness as something that you could hand to God or to the Holy Spirit or to the Blessed Mother, so handing your consciousness to another for safekeeping until you need it again in the morning. And then I would
that's
say,
beautiful.
yeah, I think most world religious traditions, and certainly Judaism and Christianity, have a storied history of people having dream spiritual experiences, uh, dream contact of different kinds with the divine or an angel or the soul of someone who has died. So that, I knew that. And so my mom taught me to do that early on. She wouldn't have called it Compline, but she taught me that our eyes are round and we look out the front of them in the daytime and we see all that God puts in front of us, and we enjoy what God's given us, and we see the beauty of things that are within our field of vision. And then at night, we look out the backside. We look inside, and God can show us because God lives inside of us, because God is everywhere. God can show us things that we would only see by looking in. And so I was used to going to sleep with that in mind. And later in my life, when I entered a monastic, semi-monastic order, we're were called semi-contemplative. So I'm not behind the walls of a monastery, but I'm supposed to pray like I am,
Okay.
and then be available to you and your audience or the people that I serve. So I learned contemplative practice. I've been a member of this order for 46 years now. So going to sleep intentionally and handing over the spirit was something that I kind of already knew. But then in my early 40s, I began having dreams about once a week where someone would show me a violent death. They would do so without it causing a nightmare. They would be gentle or discreet, but they needed to convey the idea that they died in a car crash or drowning, a shooting, a stabbing, whatever it was. And once in a while, they would be frightening briefly, but I always understood they were buffered. No one was trying to scare me or do harm. They were trying to convey a message. And I learned that some of them were traumatized by the way that they died and not immediately able to avail themselves of what we might hope comes next. Oftentimes at funerals that I attend, um, when, especially at the reception, or maybe not in the church service itself, but sometimes there's a wake where there's sort of an open mic. And when people have the opportunity to tell stories about the deceased, very often they'll muse about, well, now Jack is up there with his poker buddies, or Jim is on the first tee in Heaven's golf course, or they're having family reunions with deceased loved ones and such. Well, some people are not ready for any of that because they just died on the highway. They just flew through the windshield. Do I really need to play golf? There can be a need for a period of becoming still, sometimes for um, a lot of it is about truth, about coming to the truth of who you really are, and the truth of circumstances that you went through that might have harmed you, but there were elements that you were unable to know. Oftentimes, when people do us harm, we can't really understand why they want to do that. But people do have reasons for the things that they do and backstories and so on. A lot of addiction stuff starts with pain. A lot of times people become addicted to a substance did so because they were trying to numb the pain of something that preceded the drug problem. Anyway, a lot of what I find is in the afterlife, a lot of people are just coming to the truth of things here such that they can move past it and not have to live out of that dramatic, painful story on and on and on, and get over it. That's a lot of the reasons that people go to counselors is to recraft or re-understand a story from a different point of view so that they can be more free to live in the present moment and not have to drag along, unhappy, painful memories.
So these souls that contact you, are they souls in trauma, addiction, or a sudden accidents only? Is that the general?
Mostly. Almost all of them. The exception would be sometimes people went through a trauma years before they died, but they didn't really somehow find peace with it, and sometimes they denied it even happened. You know, um, I'm thinking of a woman who was raped by an acquaintance whom she had invited into her home for dinner, and they were part of the same social set at a country club. And she had been divorced and had not. She was just making a tentative attempt to have a social life after a long marriage ended, and thought this man was safe. He was a member of their country club, and she invited him over for dinner. And after dinner, he raped her in her living room, and she just was so appalled and then ashamed, and she wanted to, you know, pretend the whole thing never happened. And he threatened her that if she ever spoke of it, that there'd be hell to pay. And so she just decided that that was going to be a secret. And and then it had a lot of other tentacles. She thought of her home as a crime scene, and she didn't want her grandchildren to ever stay overnight. And
Um,
there were a lot of other things like that that can happen as a consequence to a trauma. And so sometimes people who've been through a trauma that they never really got healing from, I find are doing it in the first level of an afterlife so that they can, enjoy some peace and not let the worst thing that happened continue to have power.
So did this woman contact you for help to cross over?
Yes. The way that it normally happens is about once a week. I didn't have one last night, but I had one the night before. And I keep a journal on the nightstand because I know it could happen any night. Um, they um, they come and they show me something in a dream, and I wake up from it. I say a quick prayer for the person, and I write down the dream before I can forget it because dreams can have a really short uh,
Mhm.
time in memory. So I write it down to keep the detail. And then I have a series of prayer partners. Originally, I felt it was important to meet with a prayer partner in person, but then when the pandemic happened and when so many people learned how to use Zoom, uh, even people who were very unlikely converts to video conferencing. They couldn't see their children or their grandchildren or whatever unless they learned how to use Zoom. So we started, and we couldn't be in person, and plane travel was impossible. So we started. Instead of meeting in person with a prayer partner, I started doing it via Zoom. When we're together, um, I do protective prayer. You and I prayed before going live here, and I modeled with you the kind of way. I think the universe is well made, that God made everyone good, but not everyone is presently well behaved. So um, I don't have to think badly of people in the universe, but I don't pick up hitchhikers. I choose my circumstances about whom I'm with and in what circumstance. And so I don't just throw myself into the mysteries of the universe and invite everyone's everything. I pray to the persons of the Christian Trinity, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, in whom I believe I live, and I called on Saint Michael the Archangel. I don't know if he shows up in Hinduism, does he?
No, but I was exposed to him when I went to Roman Catholic high school.
Michael is common in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as
Okay,
heaven's protector.
sure.
And I've gotten to know him, and he's just delightful. He's an angelic person, not a human person, and not a divine person. We in the Catholic cosmology that I was taught, there are three kinds of persons: divine persons, angelic persons, and human persons. And during my lifetime, there's begun to be more theological speculation about the possibility of animal personhood, or at least of some of the animals that seem to like higher primates and dolphins, or animals that look like they're doing altruistic choosing. Uh, the classic cat is divine, angelic, human, and then there's this other speculative, other possibility about personhood, who is a person. But anyway, I prayed and I use Mary, the Mother of Jesus. I invite her very frequently, and Saint Dominic, the founder of my order, Saint Rose of Lima. We have a lot of mystic saints who lived with uncommon spiritual gifts. So I invite a number of those. I don't always invite the exact same group, but anyway, we spend time on a Zoom call, first creating safe space. And then after we're done with that, I usually have two partners on a call at the same time, and we might be on opposite ends of the country. Um, my prayer partners have gotten to know each other at conferences and meetups, but mostly they were people that I knew and just paired together and said, introduced them. And we normally schedule a 2 hour period during which we can do two what we call crossings. Um, the people who come to us they're at the end of a healing process and they no longer need the level of care that this afterlife plane provides. So it's analogous to the discharge staff in a medical center. Um, you've gotten to know these people who were your physical therapist or your counselor or whatever it is whatever healing gift they brought. They've watched you grow and heal to the point where you might not be a picture of afterlife spiritual help, but you certainly don't need this level any longer. And you can go on to more freedom and possibilities. So they only come to us, they're brought to us in an organized way, and usually not on their own volition. Their team is helping them, and sometimes their guardian angel will say, "If you would trust me, I'll find what I think is the best um, set of helpers to move you from this line to the next." Sometimes they'll. One lady told me just said your light was on. That's all she needed to say.
Oh
Another
my.
used to shop out of catalogs in the 50s. And she said they gave me a catalog to look at because they said there's lots of possibilities for how you make this move. And she turned a page and my picture was on it. And she said, "Oh, there's a Catholic priest who does this. So I think I'd like that because I was a Catholic." So however all that works, I don't know. We just deal with what's in front of us. So I have an appointment day after tomorrow to do uh, two crossings. So we say our prayers to protect ourselves. Then I read the story and I read them twice. Are you familiar with the phrase Lectio Divina?
No.
It just means divine reading. Uh, uh,
Okay.
so it can be done with a passage of sacred scripture, or it could be a spiritual poem or some bit of a short bit of writing, and you prayerfully read it once just for the data that the words convey. Then you get still and you read it a second time and ask your heart to feel it. Um, so we do that. It doesn't take us long, just to read the story once for the mind, once for the heart. And then I will say, and then the partners choose which one is going to be in the lead and which one is going to be in the background.
Okay.
Um, so we'll arrive at who's going to be the primary voice of this conversation. Then I'll say, okay, we're ready now for the guardian to come on the line, and I can allow them to borrow my voice. Um, it's co-conscious. I'm not entranced. It's just, I believe my voice was consecrated, um, and that particularly the order I belong to is called the Order of Preachers. And so the spoken word is very important to us. That's our reason for being, is to proclaim good news with our words and voice. So I believe my voice has been consecrated for a long time, and that it's a prophetic gift to allow someone under the right set of circumstances to borrow it. It's just a tool that God made that can be employed in more than one way. So
So is it like an analogy for channeling?
yes, I don't use that word because in the churches it's radioactive. People think of it as opening to the devil or doing some forbidden esoteric thing. I don't think it needs to be understood that way, but I don't get to define the way everybody thinks of every word. And I'm a writer and a preacher. Words are important to me. So I use the word prophet because it belongs in the Judeo-Christian tradition and it has a long history. And very often at public worship, the first reading from Scripture is a prophet. And the prophet Isaiah the person reading the text needs to be able to use their voice in different ways. The way that you might read Little Red Riding Hood to a child. You wouldn't read it in one tone because you have to give voice to the big bad wolf and the little girl and grandma or whatever. You read it with inflection and bring it alive with your voice. Well, I know that my voice can be used by me and by others. And so I'll usually say, okay, we're ready now. We'd like it if the guardian would give us clarity. For example, we know that this person died in an automobile accident, but we don't know whether they were male or female. We would like to know that, please. Um, were we in a foreign country? Well, sometimes the way people tell a story suggests that background. I'm not sure, but I think I'm in Peru. I might be in the Middle East. Um, Most of the time it's in the United States, but not always. So sometimes if there's that element, we want to know, could we please know the gender? Could we please know the locale if it's important? Sometimes the dream had a crowd scene in it, the way that movies sometimes start with a crowd scene until the director pans the camera in on Mira, and now we know that Mira is the person that we need to pay attention to. The story is about her. Well, if the dream came with a crowd, we want to know, are we helping only one person in the crowd, or are there more than one person who we might be helping today? So the guardian will come on and they'll introduce themselves, because they know that human interacting with other persons, it's helpful to know a name. It's one of the first things we do when we meet a new person is to, except maybe on a plane. Have you ever gotten in a conversation with someone seated next to you on a plane, a stranger, and you might exchange stories for a long while, and when it's time you're landing, you finally get around to saying, by the way, what's your name? Uh, that's uncommon. Most of the time we start with a name. So we ask the guardians to give us a name, and what they've chosen to do is give us nicknames oftentimes that have some little verbal connection to the story that we're about to hear more about. Um, and so the guardian will speak through me, and I'll try to. My voice doesn't change very much because vocal cords are a fixed matter of physics. Any speech that moves through me is going to be air passing through my vocal cords. So a person might speak faster, maybe with a little bit of an accent, um, maybe something that suggests masculinity or femininity, the way that when we divide a choir into sopranos, altos, tenors, bass, a person, or if I gave you you know, a tuba, would you know what to do with it? You would at least know that they're supposed to blow into it, but you would make a different sound with it than someone who was proficient and had learned to play the tuba. So the sound will vary a little bit, and I try to make sure that my prayer partners always know who's speaking, so they're not confused. The guardian will stay only for a short time, just to orient us and to break the ice, and they're also showing the one that they care for how easy it is to use the voice. It's a little bit like a mic test. I think all humans arrive on the earth with an angelic companion, whether you know it or not, or whether you're ever taught that that's true or not. And I don't believe it needs to be, one religion pounding its chest and saying we've got the truth and you've got less of it or any such thing. I just believe we all have a guardian spirit. They know from the outset that we're mortal and we're going to die one day, and that some of those deaths will be of illnesses and others will be of traumatic events. And sometimes they can do a little to um, perhaps keep us a little bit more safe than we might be otherwise. They have a
Sure.
sphere of influence where they might be able to save the day today, but not ultimately. You're going to die of something, and one of the guardian's jobs is to be with you during that very important passage to make it less frightening. And so the guardians, you might wonder, well, what kind of guardian what were you? You let me die in a car crash. Well, you know, and anybody that's parented children knows that your job is to keep them safe, but you can't follow them everywhere and protect them from every last everything. And sometimes children die before their parents. Um, it's a little bit like that. They have a protective, loving role, uh, but in this case, most of them accompanied a person through a violent death. And then they explain, very often we've heard that, yes, it's true, my body died in a wildfire and it was reduced to ashes, but my guardian got me out of it and I never even smelled smoke. You know, so very often there's a comforting message that even if you have to, if you learn that your loved one died in a violent way and you mull that over in your mind and it breaks your heart that your loved one, was shot or burned or something, very often we're told, well, yeah, it's true, but it was a lot easier than I would ever thought. It was my guardian
Yeah.
got me out of there and onto into a safe space. So
So, yeah. So in the session, you were saying this guardian speaks briefly, and then what happens?
they say, have I provided the information you need? If so, I will slide to the side and remain with you in prayer. The next one to use the voice will be my beloved. They almost always say my beloved. Uh, and then the beloved will come on the line and they'll tell me their name before they speak. And sometimes it's visual in my imagination, sometimes it's auditory. I hear consonant sounds, like I hear a CHR. Is that Christine, Crystal, Chris? And sometimes a name like that could be masculine or feminine. And so I'll be working with them and say, okay, I'm getting this, getting that your name is this. Is that correct? Anyway, we do a little negotiating about their name, and then they'll come through and introduce themselves to the prayer partners, and the prayer partners welcome them. And we're recording all this on an app on my phone. So we have an audio transcript that when we're finished, I push a button and AI turns it into a Word document. So we get every last word that happened, even all the stammering and incomplete sentences and such. Um, they Mostly they say, "Well, this is how I died, and this is what I've been going through." And then it's a brief conversation between the prayer partner and the one that we're dealing with. We learn a little bit about their story and what happened next. It might be helpful if I just told your audience one, rather.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite one that could be healing, maybe?
Well, I'm thinking of this one in particular. The
Okay.
dream showed me the way that a person narrates a story can vary. If you and I and 10 other people watched or took part in the same event at the same time, and then we all described it to someone else, we would have many things in common, but we would emphasize different things or have forgotten detail or whatever. That's just common in storytelling. Um, so it depends. This was a young man living in the upper east of the U.S., maybe Pennsylvania or New Jersey or somewhere up in there. He was Italian in a place where there were a lot of Italians, and he showed me that he was inside a 15 passenger van, stuck near the back and not near a door or a window. He was with a bunch of other people on their way to a job site in a van. They were going inside an oil refinery, which felt very familiar to me because of where I grew up. My dad was in coastal shipping, and when I got my driver's license at 16, I was allowed access into all these odd little back roads inside a refinery, all the way down to the docks where the ships were. Um, would take the oil out. Anyway, I was inside an oil refinery in this dream, and there was an explosion in the distance. It didn't affect us immediately, but we knew that now that there's been an explosion in a refinery, our day is probably going to be different. We better get on the radio and find out if our job has changed. It had, and they were told to turn around and leave. Well, the guy that was driving the van had never driven a 15 passenger van, and he tried to turn it around in a very narrow space on a bluff above a body of water inside an oil refinery. And the guy said he got it most of the way turned, and then one of the wheels was over the edge. And he referenced those movies from the 50s or where there were frequently somebody on a mountain road or whatever, where you saw the wagon wheel or the whatever, and there'd be a close up of a spinning wheel, and is it going to fall off the cliff or not? That's where cliffhanger comes from. Um, he said we were cliffhanging for a brief time, and then he brought up Gary Larson. Gary Larson was a cartoonist who was very popular in the 90s and maybe early 2000s. He did these one panel cartoons that were very popular at college campuses because he was a scientist. Anyway, he had this one cartoon that didn't have a caption because it didn't need one. It was a picture of a three-story building that must have been swept away in a flood because it's in a river and it's on fire and it's about to go over a waterfall. And on the outside, it just says crisis clinic. Every possible crisis is happening right here at the crisis clinic this second. So he thought, oh, shit, I'm in the crisis clinic. I could either die in one of three ways. This thing falls and bursts into flame and I burn, and I'm not near a door or window. I can't get out. I could die of blunt force trauma, or it could tumble all the way into that nasty water inside an oil refinery and I could drown in that. I'm in the crisis center. Uh, and then he said something happened and he doesn't even know how he died. And he said, I never saw a death certificate. I don't know what they would have said my cause of death was, which of those three or some other cause. But he said he called his guardian angel Tinkerbell from Peter Pan. He had named it that and said Tinkerbell yanked me out of that before any of those bad things could happen. and she set me on the side of the road we were on. The car went the other way, the van tumbled, and she said, do you understand that you're here with me and you're safe? He said, and she spoke like a teacher, but very authoritatively. Do you understand you're with me and you're safe? Yes. Do you understand that your body is over there and that your body carried you through many things, but it couldn't carry you through that? Do you understand? Yes, I do. Okay. Um, then she said, we are going to state right here for as long as you please. But when you say the word, I'll take you somewhere better. And he said, he had a good sense of humor. He said, let's see, are you telling me that I'm free to stay alongside a road inside of an oil refinery for as long as I want to? And she said, yes, that's about the size of it. Or we could go somewhere better. And he said, I think I'd rather go somewhere better. So they went on somewhere else, and that was into this healthcare continuum thing that I described earlier, where because of his ability to travel light and he wasn't angry at the driver, he wasn't mad at God, he wasn't mad at the universe for dying young or anything. He just accepted it as the next event. That's very, very helpful. If anybody in your audience could try to do that, just accept the next thing and do the best you can with it. Ask for the grace you need to do the next moment, and be attentive to what you can do to be of help to others at the same time. You might have some tragic thing going on in your life, but there's still a world around you. Don't let that tragic thing completely take up all your bandwidth. Can you have cancer and care about other people? You know. Um,
Okay.
anyway, he 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 said he lived in this Italian family that was big, and he said just about everybody in it owned a small business. They had dry cleaners, or they had some small shop, or bakery, or whatever it was. And he said all of them were trying to recruit him to be the next generation. His aunts and uncles were all trying to recruit him to work with him. He said, but they all gossiped about each other all the time, and they were always complaining about one another. They always were sniping, and I just didn't want to be a part of it. Somebody cut out on Nana's 90th birthday, and now there's hell to pay. Or somebody had too much to drink at the wedding, and now everybody's griping about that. He just said, I didn't want to listen to them gripe about each other for all of my life. So I was that. He said, when you're around family businesses, you start doing stuff about 10. You can at least sweep the shop room, or you can stack boxes, or but you grow up in that culture. You work, in the business. And he said, I just didn't want any to be recruited into any of their businesses and have that be my life. So that's why I was doing this other job. But he said when he got into the afterlife, people from his family started visiting him. And as though you might in a clinic, when somebody that you love is in the hospital, you don't stay a long time because you shouldn't. You visit and let them know you're caring about them and leave. He said there were visits like that, and he said you had to understand that everybody in my family was named Anthony. We didn't name any child anything but Anthony or some version of it, Antoinette or Tonette or Tony or Antoninus or something. We were all Tony. And he said at the end, when it was time for him to move, we usually get still and we say, okay, somebody's going to come for you. Do you know who you'd like to have come for you? You're going to go somewhere you haven't been yet. You're going to need a guide. Once in a while, they'll say, well, my guide is already here. My guardian angel, I'm sure, has done such a good job already. I'm sure they can take me to the next place. That's one option. Sometimes they'll say, well, gee, if it has to be somebody if it's human, it has to be a person who's died and who's willing. Um, and so will sometimes say, well, would you like your husband or your wife or your nana or whatever? People can ask for, it's not summoning, it's just requesting. Um, and we'll say if it's possible, uh, Tony would like to see his mother or whatever. Well, sometimes it's like that. Other time, once in a while, it's celebrities that show up. The way that celebrities can use their fame to raise money for a children's hospital or do kindnesses and to lift up people. Football players this time of the year from college bowl games while they're in town, they'll visit the children's hospital in their uniform, and it'll make a little kid feel really important because the football player came to visit. So sometimes it'll be somebody with some claim to fame that will use it for good. And other times, um, it's the family. In his case, sometimes they show up and they look like bowling pins. You know, when you're looking at the pins in a bowling alley, there's one in the front, and then two, and then three, and then four, and then five, and it might go back into infinity because your family line goes back generation upon generation. You might only know of a little, since photography, you might have seen pictures of some of them, but there's ones behind that. So uh, he remembered the Flying Wallendas. They were, I think in the 40s, 50s, 60s, they were a family of acrobats, and they were of all different ages. And some of them were acrobats in their 60s, and others were, little kids that were just in a tutu that were learning to fly on the trapeze. Anyway, they were on TV and they were famous. And he compared his family to them. He says they're kind of like the Flying Wallendas, except they're the floating Anthonys. They're all Anthonys and they're all floating. So, so the floating Anthonys came for him, and then so he went on his way. Well, the one thing I haven't mentioned at this point is that we never tell their stories in public, in a book or on a podcast, without first going back to them one time to ask their permission if it's okay, because their stories belong to them. So
Does anybody say no?
we've had two. Uh, Nobody has said no. Two of them asked. Well, one said, "Let's wait," and we've waited a number of years. That person died in a public event that would make them recognizable, um, and she just didn't know whether it was already bad enough that she died in a public violent crime, and she just thought, "Do my parents and loved ones really need to even hear anything more about it? Could we just let it lie?" And that's what we've chosen to do. But in a couple of other cases, people have said, yes, but let's change my name. And so, um, and that's, and I'm concerned about that. I don't want to be, I don't know, sensationalistic about these things. That's really not my job. And I'm not trying to
Sure.
grab headlines. I'm just trying to help people that ask for help. That's all. So anyway, we do go back and we ask permission to use. And when we did go back and ask Anthony, he told us that he was having a good time, that he had met up with a lot of family members, especially ones that had lived long ago. He said he got to meet St. Anthony, the real dude, the one that they were all named after. And he said he's really cool. And what else did he say? Some of his relatives said, "What the hell are you doing here? You're too young." And he said, "Well, who knows? If I hadn't gotten in that van, I might not be here. But anyway, here I am." And then he had that concern about his family that they were so riddled with gossip and unkindness to one another. One of them said, "Well, Tony, here they taught us that we can't be that way with each other. We're not allowed to annoy each other for all eternity. And if we want to do that, we're not welcome here." And so we're all just being nice to one another because that's just that kind of behavior isn't tolerated here.
Thanks for sharing that story.
It's a
Father
lovely
Nick,
story.
yeah. Does would only Christians contacted you?
No, there's three books in my Afterlife Interrupted book series, and there's a young woman who was likely Hindu. She was from India, at least, which is majority Hindu, isn't it? Um,
Yes.
so the odds are she was Hindu. She wasn't Christian, at least. And she might have been more secular, which, all of us that are raised around religious traditions don't necessarily follow them avidly, but we might be affected by them culturally. Anyway, she was the only child of two parents who were on a vacation in Sri Lanka, what used to be called Ceylon, below India. They were at a beach on a Sunday. Um, she was 12 years old, but felt like she was 20. And she really bristled at a lot of the parental stuff around her that insisted that she be 12 because she said they poured lots of educational resources into me. They both had PhDs. They were raising her to be brilliant, and she was more than 12, but she was in a 12-year-old body. Well, she wasn't allowed to go to the beach by herself because she was 12, and they were away on vacation. They didn't know anybody at this resort. And it was a Sunday morning, and her parents were sleeping in, and she just thought, you know what, I'm going to go to the beach. And what harm could it do? Well, she got to the beach just in time to be swept away by the tsunami that killed 250,000 people. And I think it was started in Indonesia, but went all through the Indian Ocean. So she was swept away. Um, And then she described some of that, but she said, "Well, you wouldn't be with us now unless you were ready to move along. What's it been like?" And she described that she received help right away, and that there was a team of people that tended to her needs, and she was made to know she was safe. But her issue was she died being disobedient. And she felt guilty that her disobedient action has now ruined her parents' lives. They'll never have grandchildren. She was the only child. And she had this dramatic story in her mind that she was a bad girl who died being disobedient and who's now ruined her parents' lives. And until she was ready to imagine that story, she was going to stay stuck in it, which would have been her perfect right. But there were others encouraging her to. I remember asking her myself because sometimes I'm not the one giving voice. Uh, I'm sometimes with others who can also do the same thing, and I'm the prayer partner rather than the one giving voice. And I remember asking her, if I'd known you, would have I despised you for being so disobedient to your parents, for being so bratty? And she said, "Oh, no, no, no. I was quite respectful. It's just that this moment." I said, "Well, listen to yourself. Are you going to punish yourself for all eternity, which is your perfect right, um, because you were disobedient at the precise wrong moment? You had colossal bad luck."
Yeah.
Can you just reframe what happened and say it's a terrible thing that happened to me, and my parents, had to realize eventually that they'd never even see my body again, and that I had disappeared. Um, but a lot of people lose a child and go on to have happy lives. There's not a direct correlation between the loss of a child and having a ruined life, which is what you've done. You've moved into the future, and you've predicted with authority that your parents are going to have horrible lives because of what you did. Well, that's not a fact based in evidence. It's it's one possibility, but you've built an entire morose, unhappy afterlife around it. Um, what if you were just to say, "I made a mistake. I did I was disobedient for a moment and I made a mistake. And now I want to go back to living with freedom and possibility and even joy." And that's what she chose. And she wouldn't have been with us were she not ready to do that anyway. They don't come in our department, if you will, until they're close to being able to move along. And her team knew that she was ready.
So how was she able to cross over?
In her
That's
case, it was her family. It was that bowling pin. That's not all that common, but the two stories that just recounted have that in common. That when it came time, uh, she felt like she had offended her family and had broken ties with them, and they wanted her to know that no, you really can't do that. We're still your family, and your parents will join us when it's their time. But for the meantime, we'd like to get to know you, and we'd like you to know that you belong here in a loving, supportive group of people who are ready to welcome you. Um, and then sometimes hers was just that. She just kind of walked into the mist. Other times there are parties or festivities of different kinds. Depends on the temperament of the person and kind of what their life was like. Sometimes there are parades. Um, Sometimes the mode of transportation is fanciful. There'll be a hot air balloon or a convertible or a float in a parade. It can be really very creative. And in her case, it was just taking a walk. But anyway, we've seen lots of different things when it comes time for the movement,
it's really nice.
isn't
How
it?
many have you done?
Uh, Somewhere around 700, I think.
Oh, wow. For souls that have recently passed,
Hmm.
and then souls that have been here for quite some time, decades, maybe centuries, is Is there a correlation between the level of difficulty to help them cross over, or not really?
Yeah, it depends. Um, One of the things that I've learned in doing this is that some of the ways that religious traditions can speak of these things is to make it sort of homogenized, that there's this is what happens when you die, and it must follow this storyline, this trajectory. That I've learned that there's some truth in that, but people are and life is just so varied. And the universe has so many different kinds of stories in it that it shouldn't be too surprising that some of the stories are quite wild, uh, or things that you would have never thought of. So there's plenty of variety. Some of it, for example, sometimes people will go unconscious because there's a lot of healing that can happen when we're asleep, even after we leave our bodies. There's still an analogous way in which our soul, our spirits can heal by being unconscious for a time and not having to think about anything. Um, so sometimes people will have slept a long while, and the fact that they did that is not impugning them in any way. It doesn't mean that they're stupid or slow. It's just an event. Um, like if when people do have a traumatic car crash on the freeway, they might stay alert in the ambulance and have the ability to talk or whatnot, or they might go unconscious and wake up in a hospital. Um, that's just, there's more than one way to do that. So sometimes people will have been asleep for what on earth would be a number of years, and then they'll be oriented to that when they awaken and say, here's what happened. Here's what's been going on since then. You've been well observed and cared for. You've been asleep. Now you're waking. And if they want to know what year is it, they'll say, if you're ready, well, it's 20 years later. And so everybody that you love is now plus 20. Uh, and some of those might have died in the intervening 20 years. There might be reunions that can be had on this, where you are now or whatnot. But they have to get ready for whatever it is that they need to do if they're just waking up groggily out of. And then there are other times when um, people sometimes they have reasons to believe that if they come out of hiding, they'll be punished. Sometimes it's because of religious training, and they'll kind of hide in the afterlife. Um, until they don't, and until somehow they edge their way out of hiding and recognize that maybe they had this wrong, or maybe they want to try something different. That it's volitional. No, but they're never made. They're never made to feel stupid, and they're not judged. Even people that committed suicide, uh, they'll they'll say, "Well, I got here, and I've wondered if I would be sent to hell, or what." And then once one woman said, "They don't make you wear a name tag that says, 'Hello, my name is Ann, and I killed myself.'" Everybody died of something, and we might speak of that as though we're at a cocktail party. You might mention casually the way that you died because it's an event that each of us has gone through. It's casual. It's interesting for a moment, but then you go on to things that are more pleasant to talk about. Uh, so, uh, but then there have been some that go back centuries, and when that happens, it isn't often, but when they that does happen, they'll say, um, they've explained to me that even though it's been centuries, that I haven't, that's no cause for shame, that everybody moves at the pace that they that's appropriate to them or that they choose. One lady got frustrated with herself. She said, "I wasn't always slow in school. I wasn't usually the brightest one, but it depended on the subject. And and sometimes I'd even get the ribbon. And they explained to me that I was progressing slowly because that's the pace I chose." And then she got kind of tired of herself and just said, "You know what? I don't want this pace anymore. I want to go quicker." And they said, "Okay, well, we've just been waiting for that moment. We'll be with you as you move quicker now that you want to." And that's what she did. And she had shut down because her husband died in front of her, and apparently healthy, had a heart attack and hit the floor and was gone. And she chose to go dissociative. Are you familiar with that?
Yes,
Um,
yes.
she started saying almost immediately, what should a woman do when her husband dies? That woman probably ought to go into his closet and pick out the clothes he's going to be laid out in. That woman probably, not me, she moved one step out of her heart because it was too painful to live there. But she never went back in. She stayed at a distance from herself for the rest of her life, maybe about 10 years, and she structured her remaining years such that everybody had to keep their distance, even her kids and grandkids. She said they only got to know the crabby old lady that I became because of that choice. Um, there was never more any warmth because I wouldn't go into my heart. And then when she got into the afterlife, she started learning. She hoped it would be what she called it glory. She was Catholic. And she said, I knew that heaven would be glory. And so I was hoping that I would die and it would be glory. And I got here and they said, well, yeah, except it will be when you choose to take part. It's just that a long time ago you quit taking part. And we need to get those muscles moving again, like they'd atrophied, that a part of her soul had just atrophied from disuse. And they said, we'll get you back there, and we'll go at the pace that you, almost like physical therapy. The physical therapist might say, let's do 5 of these reps. And if it's too painful, we'll stop. And if you want, we'll do 5 more. The healers will let you be in charge of your pace of healing. So she eventually got all the way back. And at the end, her husband came for her looking like a 16-year-old on their first date. And she felt it was safe. She could finally go back and breathe and let her heart feel again. She said, he's he's dressed up like we're going on a date and he's holding flowers that don't match because they're not the ones from the store. They're from his mama's garden. Um, but they went off together. And it just took her a while.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So I was thinking about the souls that are here for a long time. Are they ever deserted, or would the guardian angel, our guardian angel, stay with us until we cross over?
Well, remember, I'm only getting a small slice. I'm getting a tiny subset of the universe. And they're
Right.
and they're ones who come to me and they come when they're ready to move. So I wouldn't necessarily know of souls in hell or low levels of purgatory or whatever. People sometimes want to argue with me that that doesn't sound very much like what the church teaches or whatever. Well, I say, I don't know. I'm just relaying the information that I've observed. They Ask your question again because I think I'm losing its train.
I was thinking of
Are they
souls.
abandoned or left to
Yeah,
their
yeah.
isolation?
Or are we ever alone? I,
Not as much. It's impossible because of the way the universe is constructed for you to be absolutely outside of it. You cannot do that. You can use your powers to isolate yourself as much as you possibly can. And I've witnessed that. The very first person who ever came had done that. Ray, the what I call the perfect gentleman. He died in a fire at age 20, and he was angry at God and the universe because he was taught that people die because God takes them. And his first words were, who the hell does he think he is taking me just when my life was getting good? So he was mad at God, the creator of the universe, and he wanted to be left alone, except he was married at 20. They got pregnant at 18. The child was a year and a half old, and he said, my life was just getting good. And then this happened. But he said he isolated himself. I said, are you not with anybody? And he said, well, there's this guy that sits way on the edge and doesn't say anything. He stays with me, but he won't say anything. And so I said, well, in my world, that's your guardian angel. And is being respectful of you because you don't want to be spoken to. But that doesn't mean he's going to go off duty. It's going to stay with you, even if it's at a distance. And anyway, I don't think that we're ever absolutely isolated. And that's an example of how that could work.
That's very comforting. What about near-death experiences? Have you come across these in this line of work, or have
Uh,
these guys already crossed over?
Many of my prayer partners are from IONS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies, of which I'm a member. I've spoken at national conferences of IONS and at local chapters here in Arizona and other places. Um, so I'm around a lot of near-death experiencers. I've not had a near-death experience. Um, I, but in IANS, at the beginning of a talk, the speaker will often ask for a show of hands, how many of you have had an NDE? And many hands go up. And then they'll say, thank you. How many have had an STE, a spiritually transformative experience? And my hand will go up then because I've had several of those. Um, and so I've been around lots of near-death stories with all of the accompanying uh, experiences that people have while they're out of body until they return.
Would you be open to sharing one of your experiences?
Yeah. The very first one was in adolescence and childhood. I described for you at the beginning of the interview what a what a good home life I had and how it was very Catholic. Um, and I was in a Catholic school from kindergarten through seventh grade when suddenly at the end of the seventh grade year they announced it was closing. And we would all be going to public school the next year because our school would cease to exist. And um, it was a much bigger event in my life than my parents or others around me understood it to be. And my aunt was the principal of the Catholic school in the next town, and that school closed the same day. And I had to help her pull that school apart. It was only 4 years old. The buildings were almost brand new. And it just seemed like the church was forgetting about children all at once. Our diocese closed, I think, 6 schools that day. And um, I just hid my sadness and went to the public school for a year and hid um, in a group of 900 and just had to endure that year. And um, it used to be that in the previous school we got report cards on one folded piece of cardboard. It opened and there were your grades. In this new school there were 6 different like index cards from each of your classes. And I arranged them where all the 5 A's were on the top and the B was on the bottom. My dad was sweeping the porch when I came home from school. And he said, report card day, isn't it? And I said, yes, sir, it is. Well, let me see him. Well, he went through the 5 A's and said nothing. And then on the B, he just said, what happened in PE? Physical education, the easiest thing. I said, I couldn't climb a rope. I was 13. My arms were tiny, big, I couldn't lift my body weight and do a pull-up. And I was supposed to climb all the way to the top of a gym and back on a rope, and I couldn't do it. And I failed in front of everybody else, and it was humiliating. And um, I got a B, so I couldn't be on the honor roll because I couldn't climb a rope. And when he said, "What happened in PE?" Um, at the new school, the F bomb was used quite a lot. I didn't know what the word meant. Um, I thought it sounded like fork. I thought it might have been, why are people angry about forks? You know, but I knew that the devil had a pitchfork and you could hurt somebody with a fork if you really tried. So I thought that FU was about forks. And so when he said, what happened? I just said, on the outside, I said I couldn't climb a rope. And on the inside, I said, fork you. And went to my bedroom and kind of had a meltdown internally and just decided I needed to run away, but I couldn't run away to a place. I needed to do it in place. How could I run away without running away? And so I decided I would be perfect. My parents had 5 children. If I raised myself, I would have even less of their attention than I already did. My grandparents were beginning to have advanced age needs. My household was very busy. I just thought if I give them no reason to need to raise me, I'll raise myself. And I did go to the Catholic high school the following year, and then went off to college. And but before I left, there was a retreat, a campus ministry retreat at the local college, where college students led a retreat for Catholic high school students. And in it, I rode with other people. I didn't have a car, and I was there for the weekend. I was stuck, and they said the theme of the weekend is, "What do you think about your parents?" And I just thought, oh, I thought it was going to be about sacraments or commandments and prayers, and thought safe topics. Now we're going to talk about unsafe things. And, um, but I was they put us in small groups that were like, they called them families. The mom and dad were the college students, and the kids were high school juniors and seniors. But people tell the truth in a way that I'd never witnessed before. Have you ever been in such a circumstance where
Yes. Yeah.
people speak from the heart?
Hmm.
Um, well, they told the truth, and often with tears, because nobody ever asked, or it was never safe to talk about this thing that happens in our home or that happens in my heart. And so I just said, well, okay. The truth is, I quit talking to my dad 5 years ago, and I'm about to go off to school with money he earned, and it just seems so dishonest. And it's a moment in life that ought to be done right, and it's approaching, and I don't know what to do. I've never spoken to him from my heart before and wouldn't know how to begin. Um, so I told that story, and I just felt bad about, holding a grudge that long over something that was pretty innocent on his part. He hadn't any idea. So anyway, they said, later they said, would you like to, any of you like to go to confession? It was a Catholic retreat, and I hadn't gone to confession to a priest in years. I knew how to do it, but I just hadn't been doing it. I said, sure, I've already done the hard part. I've already told the story out loud. I could repeat it in a shorter version for the priest. I received absolution, and then the retreat ended with a communion, so with a mass that included communion. And we believe that the bread and the wine becomes the body and blood of the Lord. We take it into our bodies, and so now we're taking the fullness of God into our bodies through our mouth. And when I did, my whole body lit up. Everything went cosmic and tingly and expansive and full of love. And boundarylessness, and all of this is happening in public. And I got back to my place and sat down and started crying, which I never do, and still hardly ever do. And my palms and my hands heated up, and I knew that it had something to do with healing, not just my healing, but the healing of others. And anyway, I went home and I woke my dad up and uh, initiated that conversation and said, did you know I quit talking to you 5 years ago? And he said, yep, I just didn't know what to do about it. And I said, well, I'd like to try. And then I told him the story, and he said, anything else? I said, well, yeah, there is this other thing. I was one of five, and he had what seemed to be a big man crush on my older brother, and not a lot of room for me and my younger brother. The way that families just sometimes have these little peculiarities. And I said, isn't it true that you love David more than you love me? And he said, yep. I said, okay, well, good to know. Because I didn't think I was making it up. And I didn't really mind. He was telling the truth. And that's all I was asking. And I said, well, it's kind of felt that way. Um, so he said, anything else? I said, no, I think that's about enough. You can go back to, I'd woke up, he was in bed. I said, that's about enough for right now. But I told him I loved him, and I did the kind of awkward hug that one might do standing, leaning over a person in bed, and then went on with it. But still, I mean, I'm almost 70, and that I was 18, and that broke me open, and it opened my heart again. And so I can appreciate these people I haven't been through a physical trauma to my body, but I know what interior pain feels like, and I know what it's like to bear a story that's over exaggerated, that might have some basis in truth, but that's been given too much space. And so, anyway, that's
Thanks for sharing that. That's really
sure.
beautiful. Have your beliefs changed because of this work that you're doing?
Of course, not radically so. It's been more of a shift of emphasis. Um, I never was one to embrace the parts of the Catholic story that involve a lot of fear of death and fear of punishment and fear of hell. I think of well, in India, it's the Ganges. In North America, it's the Mississippi. In Africa, it's the Nile. In South America, it's the Amazon. There are these big rivers, and I think of these religious traditions as having, they're broad and deep and wide, and they're inclusive of lots of things. but you don't necessarily, by being a member of one of these world religions, um, embrace all of it the same way everybody around you does. Um, I learned early about this punitive idea in school of mortal sin. And at the time, mortal sin could be skipping Mass on Sunday. Oh my heavens, you mean I could burn in a fiery pit for all eternity because I watched TV instead of going to church? Well, that's what I was being told. And I just kind of put an asterisk next to that in my mind and thought, these people are doing the best they can, and that they're repeating what they've been told. But that just seems overly harsh to me. I don't think I'm going to uh, work myself into a fret. I didn't skip Mass anyway. We weren't a family that did that. But if I did, I don't believe I would have been dangled over a fiery pit for it. So um, I believe I've seen lots of people who are not Christian take part, not just only Ronnie, the young woman I mentioned who might have been Hindu, but Muslims killed in Muslim on Muslim violence in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria. There's been a lot of in my lifetime. There's been a lot of violent death in the Muslim world, uh,
Sure.
uh, and and then nominally Christian people that don't pay much attention to church or whatnot who end up in my line. And sometimes they're a little alarmed that they're with a priest and am I going to judge them? And I say, well, do you want to be judged? Uh, I don't feel the need to do that. I'd rather really just help you. What is it you want and how can I help you get it? And, I believe too that if people grow towards truth, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And however that flies in you mentioned that Christ is part of your, uh, I'm not in charge of everybody's everything. I'm just trying to do the small thing that I've been asked to do and do it well and leave the rest of it um, to the mystery. And maybe if I need answers to these things, I don't have to insist that I have them all now. I can just love and be compassionate and treat others as I'd like to be treated. And I think we're known for that. And the guardians don't bring people in our line who are afraid they're going to be judged because we just don't do that. We were told not to. Jesus told us not to judge. So I don't feel like I really need to do that. And sometimes I'm criticized by being too universal or too, there's a word indifferentism that I'm saying. Have you ever heard of it? That
Yes.
I, I hadn't until recently. That I'm not Catholic enough or something like that, and that just comes with the territory. And there won't there always, especially if you're a public person, won't there always be people that will want to disagree with you or whatever? I just have to tolerate a certain amount of that.
I love the name Joyful Friar, the name of your podcast. Can
Yeah.
you talk to us about that and mention how else people can find you?
Yeah, the founder of the order that I belong to, we're informally called the Dominicans because our founder was Saint Dominic of Guzman. He was a Spaniard who founded us in the early 1200s. And his nickname was the Joyful Friar. Friar is just from, well, in French it would be frère, it just means brother.
Mhm.
Uh, so we're in a brotherhood, a fraternity, and he was known as the Joyful Friar. And when I was looking at all the different religious orders there are in the Catholic Church and ways to be a priest, there's quite a variety of them. It's daunting when you're starting out looking for where am I supposed to land. When I learned that this one was that the founder was the Joyful Friar, that I just said, that's what I want. I believe that the message is joyful. And in the Christian story, Good Friday turns into Easter morning pretty quickly. Good Friday can be as horrible and awful as one can imagine, but Easter morning comes soon, and that we can wait in joyful hope. If we can't be hopeful today, uh, can we wait in joyful hope? Can we anticipate goodness, even if we have to move through a period that's difficult? And um, so that's why I took that. When it came time to name the podcast, I went to St. Dominic and asked if it was okay. And he said, I never called myself that to begin with. Others said that. But
That's
he
lovely.
he said, I don't own that, but yes, of course you may use it if you like. So that's what's called the Joyful Friar. And then it's made me be, if not joyful, at least living in joyful hope, that I have to live up to the name because I can go dark and sad and angry and so on. And when I catch myself doing that, I'll say to myself, "And you call yourself the Joyful Friar? Snap out of it. You you don't need to stay this way. Uh,
I
you're
have
all
three last questions for you.
yeah, sure.
What brings you joy and laughter these days?
Um, well, the company of loved ones.
What would you say to young Nathan who is about to embark on these great adventures?
Um, well, I think I'm grateful to my younger self that I stayed with it. Whatever I was doing, I stayed with what was in front of me, and I did my duty, and I worked hard, and I received the graces and blessings that were there for me. Um, so well done. And then I would say to him, I wish I could have learned how to calm down earlier than I did. Um, I had a kind of a perfectionistic streak that I had to learn to uh, temper. And a spiritual director told me in my 20s, Nathan, when you get to heaven, you're going to want to improve it. Um, and
That's great.
and so I've had to learn how to just accept things as they are sometimes without feeling that I'm responsible for changing them somehow. That's helped me do this work because I don't approach it where I'm supposed to make these people hurry up or uh, stop this or whatever. I just accept that where they are and help them move to where they might be next. And I think over the life course, I've learned how to do that in my own life.
What final blessing or message do you have for those listening?
I'm going to quote one of the people. We didn't mention her story, but Sylvia showed me a dream where I was a woman getting up in the night to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night in a creaky house, all alone, with a sad song playing on a turntable. It was um, Natalie Cole singing "Unforgettable," which her father had recorded decades earlier. Um, and I woke up. Well, it's a lovely song about love, but it's kind of wishing I could forget you, but you're unforgettable. What had happened is she was 28 years old when her husband and 2-year-old daughter ran an errand in the car and were killed. And her house went from being her husband and child and maybe future children that they might later have, all of that went away in an instant. And she decided that from then on she would be an icon of tragedy and sadness, and that anyone who'd ever be around her would have to enter into the world of tragedy and sadness because that's now what she represented. So she didn't go out for drinks after work. She never invited anyone to her home. She began watching a lot of television, which she hated. Um, she eventually got a cancer diagnosis at 40 that was late stage, and she said it was all I could do not to dance up and down because I could get out of here. And she moved through an afterlife process, but she had to re-engage too because she had quit living. Um, and in the end, we went back to her a second time and asked, "Do you have anything you'd like to leave as a message?" And she said, "Yes, I do. Tell everybody, don't let the worst thing that happened to you define you,"
I love that.
which is what she had done. She said, "Just don't do that. You know, bad
Yeah,
things will happen, but they don't have to define you."
yes. Thank you very much, Father Nathan, for
All
being
right.
here with me today.
Mhm.
And I hope everyone enjoys this as much as I did.